So what does humility look like in modern experience? I think Marva Dawn, a professor at Regent College up in Vancouver, British Columbia, has a great example from the life of her husband. Marva's had a number of medical challenges in her life, and one time her husband was driving her to the doctor. They were on a 3-lane road. They were in the middle lane. They came up to a stoplight, and after the light turned green, the car in front of them wouldn't move. And cars started going by on the left and the right, and Marva waited, and finally she looked at her husband and said, "Honey, why don't you just drive around and let's get going?" And her husband said, "Well, I'm not sure the person in front of us is okay. Maybe something's wrong. I want to make sure they're okay before we move on." Now, how many of us in that situation would be so frustrated that we're being put out, that we're being inconvenienced? But that's true humility. Someone who says, you know what, I might be able to help someone. It's not about how they inconvenience me. It's about how I might be able to serve them. And that's humility in action. It's a state in which we no longer look at the world through the lens of self-interest. We see ourselves as God's servant, available to be used by Him. Andrew Murray described this as the displacement of self by the enthronement of God. The displacement of self, we lose self-concern by the enthronement of God, seeking first His kingdom and His purposes. Another way to describe this is that humility is not thinking less of ourselves. That's what some people think, that we have to deny our strengths, we have to deny what God has done. That's not reality. Humility isn't thinking less of ourselves, it's thinking less about ourselves. We don't determine whether an event is good or bad by how it reflects on us, but on what needs to be done. And this is such a freeing disposition. Imagine going into a party. Often what happens, and I would talk to my girls about this as they were growing up, I said, most people are going to a party and they want to be noticed, they want to be appreciated, they want others to include them. And I thought, but in one sense, that is a lust that can't be satisfied. Can we be noticed enough? Can we be appreciated enough? But if we go into a social gathering saying, Lord, is there someone I need to notice? Is there someone I need to appreciate? Is there someone I need to encourage? We're going to leave that party in great spirits because there's always going to be somebody who needs that service. And so what humility does is it removes that desperate feeling and replaces it with mission. It leads to soul rest. It leads to a sense that we are accepted by God and now we are free to focus on and serve others.
Mr. Thomas talked a lot about the importance of humility and what that might look like in the church and in our culture. In this lesson, I want to use the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament to examine how this word was used and understood in ancient culture. First, let's open up our Bibles to one of the verses that Mr. Thomas mentioned in his discussion, James 4:6. This was mentioned in a previous lesson. Right-click on the word humble, and the context menu shows that it is the word tapenos. Select the Lemma tab, and then scroll down on the left side of the context menu to open it up from the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament. Scroll down slightly to section A of this article, titled, The Use of the Word Group in the Greek and Hellenistic World. Section 2A defines the secular Greek usage of tapenos as lowly, insignificant, weak, poor, when it is used in the context of political powers, insignificant bodies of water, poverty, and defeated military powers. Section 2B lists examples of when the word was used to refer to the spiritual or moral state of a man. It was used in a disparaging manner. It was used of slaves and those in low social status. The next paragraph is packed full of information and examples, but towards the bottom it concludes that the contextual use of the term in Greek culture gives it a negative character. Now let's go back to our Bible and jump to 1 Peter 5:5. This is another verse that Mr. Thomas mentioned from his previous lesson. Right-click on the word humble again and scroll down to the lemma tapina phrasune. This is also the word used in the famous Philippians 2:3 passage, where we are told to have the mind of Christ. This word, a variation of the term tapinos that we've looked up before. When we go to the TDNT from here, it takes us to the same article we were in before. This time we need to scroll down to section 5 of the article for the discussion on this form of the word. The end of 5b says that this word denotes weakness and pusillanimity in the works of Epictetus. The word in 5a, tapenothron, is translated as humble in 1 Peter 3:8. In Greek literature, this word referred to the fearful and poor-spirited. It is interesting to note that almost all of the uses of these words in ancient culture were negative. Humility was considered a negative trait, and yet for God it is a positive trait. This shows just how differently our culture often lives apart from God's ways. It also makes me wonder how even we as Christians may be influenced by our own culture's view of humility. Are there aspects of humility that we as Christians brush off because our culture views it negatively? Do we as Christians say, well, humility can't mean this or this, because those are negative traits? Maybe the characteristics that our culture views negatively about humility are the characteristics we should be striving for.